All right, hey, we're here getting ready to talk about TPR, how to put TPR into practice in the classroom. I'm here with Daryl talking about this stuff. So if you listen to this recording, welcome. Glad you decided to join us here. So we're just going to run through some quick ideas and tips and kind of go over how we teach TPR in beginning classes. Last recording we did, we talked about the theory of TPR, how it works, why we use this method, the birth of this method, where it was developed, and all that kind of good stuff. So today we're going to dig right into the practical aspect, and then probably after this we'll have one more at least focusing specifically on TPR, going into kind of the more advanced techniques. But anyways, I want to kind of do a quick overview of how we do teach TPR in the classroom. I get a lot of questions about this from people who are wanting to know how it works. Remember basically that TPR is what we use with beginning students. It's not something that we use so much with more advanced students. Not that you can't. As a matter of fact, you apply the principles and techniques with more advanced students all throughout their learning process, because the more you apply the principles behind TPR, the easier it is for them to learn. But as a hardcore method, what happens is if you use TPR all the time, after a while the students begin to adapt. So we do apply other methods and techniques, and obviously students have different learning styles, so you want to use what's best for your students and what their needs are. But for teaching students, helping them grasp and assimilate the basic vocabulary that they need, which is what TPR is great for doing. It's a way of applying the lexical approach, because you're actually teaching words in context, in sentences through command forms that students can really grasp and understand implicitly. You don't actually have to translate each of the sentences for them. You just give them commands. If they don't understand it, you can do it or have another student demonstrate, and so they associate what they're hearing with what they're seeing. So that's what makes it such a powerful tool. So when you get into your first class and you're teaching TPR, you're talking with your students, you're going to, first of all, what I like doing is giving them a brief introduction to the method and how it works and why we use this method, just so they understand what we're going to be doing. And I like to tell them ahead of time what we're going to teach them. So I'm like, okay guys, today you're going to learn this, this, and this, and these words. And they'll kind of look at you like, yeah, right. They don't believe you when you tell them all the words they're going to learn. But at the end of class, when you go back through and say, okay, what's this, what's this, what's this, and they realize they know all those words, and you're like, see, and that something tangible where they actually realize how much they learn, which is something that's hard to do when you're teaching English, because students don't always, realize how much they're learning, or they don't see that step-by-step progress. So sometimes they feel like they're stagnating and they're not learning. So it's just a unique, a cool way to actually show them how much they're learning. So when you get into the first class, you kind of give them that overview, tell them what they're going to learn in that class. And after that, especially in the beginning, if none of the students know the words that you're going to be teaching them, then you can just model them yourself as the teacher. So basically I start off, I'm sitting down in the chair, and I give them a command. I'll ask a student to stand up, for example. And obviously if they've never studied English before, nobody's going to know what stand up means. So I'll model it myself by standing up. So I say stand, and I stand. Then they make that association with the word stand and the action stand, which is just like a child learning their mother tongue. And so it allows them to grasp it quickly and easily, and it helps them build up their confidence, because then when you point at them and you say stand, they're like, okay, they do it, and they're like, wow, I'm learning English. And it's not that difficult. It's not like where you're trying to get them to translate. Stand means, and then you translate it in their language. So every time they hear the word stand, they have to do that translation, that crossover brain switch in their mind, and they can instantly and automatically associate it with its exact meaning. So you're going to start off initially just using simple one-word commands: stand, sit, walk, stop, turn, run, jump. Those are the basic TPR words that you start off with. And the way we've got this set up, we've actually broken these lessons down into 21 words. And kind of, if you look at it, what we try to do is have the first words being verbs, and then some more words being nouns, and then the last few words on the list being adjectives and adverbs and prepositions and stuff like that, just so they kind of get a general all-around grasp on the language. We try to focus on the most common words. So in the beginning, initially, just try to keep it real simple, and as you model them, the students are going to see it. Well, what happens is you usually only have to model it once, and after that they pick it up pretty fast. So by the time you jump to the second student and you say stand, then he does it, and then you do the second student, third student. So you're teaching them stand up, sit down, walk, and then you just keep adding one command onto the other, and so you're teaching them new words, but you're recycling and repeating those words that they've already heard. So for example, you're teaching them stand up, and then you tell them sit down, and then you tell the next student stand up, and he stands up, and you teach him walk, and then you teach them stop, and you teach them turn. And so when you get to the next student, you can kind of vary that. Since they're expecting to hear stand when they're sitting down, then you can say turn or something just to catch them, to see if they're really grasping it or if they're just if they're just kind of guessing. So you don't want to, it's not like you're trying to trick them, but you do want to mix and match and make sure you're not just getting into a rhythm that the students already can foretell what you're going to say. For example, there was one teacher who didn't last too long because he wasn't very creative, and the students didn't really like his classes because basically he would give the same command to every student. He would say, point to the box, point to the box, point to the box, point to the box. So it's like the students didn't even have to, try to understand the language. They would just do what they saw the other students doing. So you don't want to get into that rut. You've got to be creative. You've got to come up with novel commands. You want to use those words, but in different contexts and different ways, and try to mix and match them. So anyways, you're going to start off with simple one-word commands, and you're going to build and develop into simple sentences. And then as time goes on, you're going to progress to more and more complex sentences. So initially you might just be saying stand up, sit down, walk, those kind of things. And then you'll progress to stand up and walk. And then you'll progress a little bit farther, stand up and walk quickly. And you'll teach them some more words like table, and then you'll say stand up and walk to the table quickly. And then you teach them more words, and then you'll have them doing more complex things like stand up, walk to the table quickly, and point to your nose. So you're just increasingly, gradually, and what you'll notice is that it doesn't take them too long to understand. What's really cool is because once they learn some of the basic structures and the basic words, even when you throw novel sentences at them that they've never heard before, they still understand and they can do it even though they haven't heard that before. For example, like I'm trying to think of a good example, something that I've done in class where we'll teach them the word stand up, and we'll teach them head, and we'll teach them put down. And so then you'll put in a new word. You'll say put your head on the table. They've never heard that sentence, but they understand the basic words there. Put, head, and table, and so they make that association, and that's what allows for that zero trial learning that we talked about previously. So as you do this, remember that for your students to really assimilate a word and internalize it, according to linguists, they need to hear it about 40 to 60 times. So if you just say it once or twice, then they're not really going to grasp it and assimilate it. So they need that repetition. What's cool about the TPR is that you can get a lot of repetition in because you're using novel sentences, you're using it in different contexts in different ways, they're not getting bored of just hearing that same word over and over. Like I mentioned, that point to the box, point to the box, point to the box. You're telling them point to the box, pick up the box, open the box, put the marker in the box, put the box on the head, on your head, put the box under the floor, under the table, and stuff like that. So you're using that word in different ways. What I like to do personally is introduce these new vocabulary words in groups of three. So for example, I'll take a group of like 3 words, stand up, sit, and walk. And so I'll focus on those 3 words and really make sure the students understand them. And then once they've learned those words, practice it with all the students, and then jump on to the next 3 words. Now, this isn't a hard, fast rule, but this is just something that I learned from my mentors when I started teaching TPR, and this is kind of just something that's stuck with me. But what's nice about it is you're not just focusing on 1 word, you're actually focusing on 3 words, so that learning those 3 words simultaneously, and you're getting plenty of practice in with your students. And what I used to do originally was I had some cheat sheets. I had like these little cards. I made them in Word. They had like lists of 3 words. And so if I had like 21 words and I was teaching them, and I have 7 cards, and each card would have 3 words on it. So I just kind of keep it in the palm of my hand. It was real small, indiscreet. So it's not like you're looking at this big old sheet of paper trying to figure out what words you're going to teach next. You just got it in the palm of your hand. You can look at it briefly, kind of like those TV announcers. When they're doing their talk shows, they've got those fancy cards that they look at so they know what to do next. Well, it's basically that same thing. So you just kind of teach them those words on that first card, then you flip them around to the back, you teach them the next 3 words, flip those around to the back, teach them the next 3 words. And as you do that, then you work through all those cards, and then when you get to the end, then you can just do your review and look at them. So that way you don't have to worry about what to teach them next. You can just follow right along with your little cheat sheets there. And just as a quick bonus tip here, something that I learned in the beginning, what I would do is I'd just try to make up all the novel sentences up off the top of my head in class. And that can get really stressing at times, because you're like, what am I going to say next? What's a new novel sentence that I can come up with, and it just kind of gets wearing and draining. And so from another teachers, we were talking about this, and he was using TPR at the same time. He was like, David, something I've realized is that if you plan your sentences ahead, you don't have to write out every single one, but if you write out sentences with those words ahead of time, so that just helps your brain get used to those things and accustomed to it. It makes it a lot easier, so you're not having to make up all the sentences off the top of your head. You just modify them and rotate them and switch them around, which is really cool. Once I started doing that, it really helped as well. So we have some cool resources like the command book, as well as other books. There's another good book, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but I'm looking right here at the command book now. It was actually put together by a teacher right here in Brazil, and if I remember correctly, I think it's in Manaus, by Stephen Mark Silvers. And let's see, yeah, the Manaus Brazilian American Cultural Institute, he put together this great little book with, I think there's like over 2,000 words in here with commands already made up. So sometimes when you don't have an idea of how to use a particular word, even recently talking with a teacher, he's like, hey David, what kind of commands can I give with this word? And my mind just drew a total blank at the time. I was like, look in the command book. So he went and he looked it up. He found some great examples, and so he went off and taught class with that. And so it's just a cool little resource to help you, especially with words that aren't so easy to make a command with, like possible or wavy, things like that. Little words like that you might not think up sentences off the top of your head with, you can find them in here. Now, after a time, as you're teaching TPR, you get into the groove and the swing of things, it'll be a lot easier. But especially when you're starting off, these kind of resources can really help you, having the command book, having those little cheat sheets, and just recalling some of these tips here. Just remember that your focus with TPR is the student's comprehension. You want to make sure that the students comprehend everything that you're teaching. So you want to make sure it's visual, that you can demonstrate it with objects. You want to make sure that you can demonstrate it through action, because if you get into really abstract stuff, abstract words that you can't teach through action, and you're trying to explain it, then that can get complicated too. Another thing is not to try to give all the meanings of the word. You're teaching a word and you want to, trying to think of a good example here, but let's say a word that has several different meanings. And so you're trying to teach all the different meanings of that word to your students. Don't worry about doing that. Just teach them the most common meaning, the meaning that's the easiest to get across with TPR, because otherwise you'll confuse them. And then as they grow and develop, they'll learn that that word has other meanings. So a lot of times what people try to do is write the words on the board ahead of time and then teach them. And I don't particularly like doing that, just because if you do that, then the students want to try to pronounce the word the way they see it written on the board. Whereas if you teach them the pronunciation and then they see the word written, they can associate it a lot easier. It's like people who learn how to speak. Once they see the words written, they can pick it up pretty quick. But people who learn how to read and write well in English, but they don't know how to speak, they might read, like especially doctors and internet technicians, people who read a lot, they'll understand technical manuals that they read, but they can't understand anything they hear, and they can't talk. They don't know how to pronounce the words correctly. And there was an example where I was teaching in a company one time, and I taught them a bunch of words in the office, and then a couple days later, a couple of the students were looking at a book and they're like, hey, here's this word and there's this word and there's this word. And I was like, how do you guys know those words? I haven't showed you those words yet. And they're like, oh, but you taught us in class. I was like, right, I know, but I didn't show them to you written down. And they're like, oh, it's easy. Once we understand the word, we comprehend it, and we see it written down, then it's easy to pick up on. So I thought that was really cool. So as you progress, you're teaching them these new words, but then they're going to get to a place where you're going to teach them new sentences, novel sentences, and you can recycle in that old vocabulary. So even as you teach them new structures, you can go back and review that old vocabulary just to keep it fresh in their mind. And like I mentioned earlier, try not to repeat the same phrase over and over and over again, because they'll just get bored and tired of that. So try to keep it novel. Try to keep it fast-paced, because if you're going too slow, then the students are going to get bored. But you don't want to go too fast at the same time, because then if you go too fast, and they kind of get overwhelmed with all the new words, and they'll feel frustrated, like they're not learning anything, and then they'll feel like giving up, which is the opposite of what you want. So just remember, the focus is on comprehension, and you don't have to worry about trying to force the students to speak, especially in the beginning classes. I usually like to try to let my students, I tell them, don't worry about speaking the first 2 months at least. A lot of times within 3 or 4 classes they already want to talk, and if so, that's fine. But it's different where them wanting to talk and you trying to force them, say repeat after me or say this, and then they feel embarrassed, like they're going to say something wrong. So if you tell them not to speak, it's almost kind of like reverse psychology. You're saying don't talk, and it's like makes them want to talk and repeat the stuff that you're saying. So it's kind of a funny thing that I've noticed in class. But as you're teaching them, just make sure that you're reviewing often those old structures, those old sentences, those old vocabulary words. Go back. You can go back through them, cycle through them. If you've got those cheat sheets, teach them all your new words, but then go back through and review some of the older words that you've taught them as well, which isn't really hard to do with TPR. It's just that sometimes there's so many words or so many sentences that you kind of forget some of the things that you've taught. So having those cheat sheets will really help you. Another thing that's good to have are props, and these are just like little objects that represent the words that you're teaching. And these can actually be physical objects, like if you're teaching the word ladder and you take a step ladder into class, or you're teaching the word plate and you take some plates and cups and silverware into class. That's great. A lot of times you can demonstrate them with drawings as well, especially like occupations. You can have little occupation cards. You can get them off the internet, or even in the command book they have simple little drawings. You can just draw them yourself. There's even place cards. There's a great resource that I recommend that I like using a lot with my students is the Lexicary, because you've actually got um, pictures, and each of the pictures are numbered, so you can teach a lot of vocabulary out of that. There's operatives here in the command book, kind of like action verbs that you can use to teach them, patterns. I'm trying to find it. There's somewhere in here where I think there's actually a whole list, okay, right here in the beginning, of props that you can use, a list of props. So, you can assemble your props, put them in a box, or keep them in boxes, like for example, for each theme that you're working on. That way, even if you have different teachers in the school, one can be working with a certain series of props and somebody else be using other ones. So for example, like we have a basket with some props up here. There's, I think, a box out in the classroom with other props in it. So just some kind of run through here. Here's some samples for you. You've got like cookies and cork and corn cob, cotton ball, cough medicine, crackers, crayons, flute, knife, and there's just a whole list of them. Simple things that you can take into class, that your students can see and make it visual, and they can actually learn better. And what actually happens is having these props there will make it easier for you to teach, because instead of you trying to think up a novel sentence, you can just look at the object and make up a sentence with that object. Or even at times, have your students do something and then you tell them what they're doing. So basically, you're focusing on giving commands. If you think of TPR, think of it as giving commands. You're teaching almost everything in the imperative. You're telling them to pick up the box, put it on the table, give it to somebody else. And so really you're just giving commands. But that's not all that TPR is limited to. You can teach, there's a really good book that's called Teaching Grammar Structures through TPR. There's over 50 grammar structures that you can teach. And you can get into all kinds of really cool things, because as you take it to the next step, after you teach the commands, and you can have the students giving each other the commands where they're practicing their speaking skills. You can teach the grammar structures. You can teach the vocabulary words in context. You have them learning the correct pronunciations. You're having them learn how the grammar sentences are structured correctly, so they're not thinking in their mother tongue. For example, like in English and Portuguese, the grammar structures are different. In Portuguese, the adjectives always come after the noun, and in English, they come before. So when a student wants to speak in, say for example, a Brazilian student wants to speak in English, they want to translate the way they speak Portuguese, and they bring that contamination into the English language. They contaminate it and actually speak backwards. So by hearing the commands through TPR, they actually end up learning how to use, how to form the structures correctly. They pick up on a lot of those little nuances, those subtleties of the language, like how to use the prepositions correctly, what prepositions to use in what context. They learn the intonation and all that kind of cool stuff. So it's really fun, it's practical, and it's an easy way for your students to learn. They like it because they're not just basically memorizing stuff, but they feel like they're playing around, they're having fun, and at the same time they're learning. So then you take it to the next step where you have them giving commands, giving you commands, giving each other commands, and there's a whole series of exercises. You can teach reading, writing, listening, speaking through TPR, and we'll get into more about that in our next episode, because we're almost running out of time here, so we'll have to leave that for our next series, where we'll get into some of the more advanced stuff about using TPR. But just remember that as you're teaching, you're constantly evaluating your students. It's not like you have to give them a test afterwards, because as you're teaching them and you're saying, point to the book, and you see them point to the book, then you know that they understand what you're saying. If you say point to the door and they point to the board, then you realize that they're having trouble with that word. Or if you say, something else and they do the wrong thing, or they point to the wrong object, then you know what you need to work on more to actually help them. And another thing that's interesting here is you don't have to correct everything they do. For example, if you say point to the book and they point to the door, you don't have to say, no, no, don't point to the door, point to the book. Okay, you don't have to actually correct them and embarrass them, or, which is a big problem that a lot of teachers face in classes, how to correct the students without making them feel bad or without make it frustrating them. So for example, if a student points to the book, if I just say point to the book and the student points to the door, then what's your next step? You just say point to the door, and then the student's going to stop and he's going to think, okay, I'm pointing to the door, and before the teacher said book, so they almost instantly and automatically they realize that something's not right there. So that's where you can say point to the door, and then if they get it right, then you'll say, okay, point to the book, and then they'll either tell you that they don't know, or they'll realize what book is, and they'll automatically correct themselves. So it's just a cool little way that you can teach them, have fun with them, and even when they make mistakes, you can correct them indirectly without pointing out their errors directly or embarrassing them. You just kind of play around with it and have fun and just laugh and have a good time. And even as they're learning, they realize that it's not that stressing, which is basically just like, children learning their mother tongue. When you have a little kid and you're saying, okay, pick up the ball. The kid doesn't know what ball is. You can't translate ball into any other language because they don't speak any other languages. They're still learning how to speak their mother tongue. So you show them the ball, you point to the ball, you say pick it up, and you pick it up and put it back down, and the student picks it up. So that's basically what we're trying to do with the TPR, is just modeling the way students learn their mother tongue, allowing the students to learn naturally and automatically without having to go through that whole translation process or memorizing different vocabulary words out of context. They're learning in context, they're learning the structures, they're learning the pronunciations, and they're just playing around and having fun. So it's a lot of good stuff. It's a great method. I hope you have as much fun with it as I did. Do you have any questions? No. All right. If you come up with anything later, you can ask me or let me know. Or if you guys that are listening to this recording later have any questions or comments, feel free to let us know as well. So anyways, in our next episode, we'll get into, like I said, the more advanced topics, how you can teach reading and writing with TPR, and how you can, work them into that phase of them actually speaking naturally and automatically. So that's it. Talk to y'all later. God bless you. Have a good day, and bye-bye.